So one of my New Year's resolutions is to start video blogging a little bit more, and so one of the things I'm going to start by doing is taking a couple of my older posts and making them into YouTube videos. So the one that I want to start with today, and I'm going to be reading it off my laptop because it's fairly lengthy, but it's about oversexualization and desexualization and how that equals objectification, especially for bisexual fat women. I'm choosing to talk about that topic specifically because it's something that I have experienced, something I have experience in as a bisexual fat woman. And I actually read this for Reagan Chastain's Fat Acceptance Conference last year, 2014. I keep forgetting it's 2016 now. All right, so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to throw out a trigger warning for those who need it, because I'm going to be talking a little bit about rape culture and statistics as it pertains to the objectification of women and bisexual women in particular. I want to talk about this trend that I see, where there's this mashup of oversexualization and desexualization. Oversexualization can apply to a lot of people, but right now I'm going to talk about the topic as it pertains to bisexual women. As a bisexual woman, I get to hear a lot of the stereotypes and then some. Bisexuals are sluts. They cheat. They're dirty. They carry STDs. They'll sleep with anyone. They're always up for a threesome. While there's a hearty dose of slut shaming in biphobia, I want to focus particularly on the stereotypes that bisexuals have a lot of sex and that this sex is somehow what defines them. If you'll notice, most stereotypes about bisexuals involve sex, while monosexuals have alternative names for their sexualities, gay, lesbian, straight. Bisexuals are stuck with sex in the title. This may be both caused by and contribute to the problematic ways bi people are viewed. Bisexuals are rarely seen as people and often seen as oversexed and always willing. It is perhaps for this reason that bisexual women face rape more often than monosexual women. In fact, they're about 3 times more likely to experience it. According to the CDC, 61% of bisexual women have been raped, stalked, or assaulted by an intimate partner, compared to 41% of lesbian women and 35% of straight women. The segment of these women facing rape in particular is even scarier. 13% of lesbians, 17% of straight women, and 46% of bisexual women have experienced rape. So imagine what that means for bisexual women. Imagine how terrifying that is. Women in general have to constantly be on their guard, even in the midst of friends. Remember that most rapes are perpetrated by someone known to the victim. So 46%, that's almost half. That's a big number. That's a scary number, and it means never being sure if you're safe. It's pretty obvious that oversexualization leads to objectification. Objectification is the point at which a living being becomes an object, a commodity. In media, we often see women literally turned into objects. One recent example is a Coca-Cola bottle with a human-esque shape and a fat belly used to talk about the obesity epidemic. This is a clear example of the objectification of fat people, but let's go back to women in general for a moment. A study by Princeton psychologists showed that some men, specifically men that they identified as sexist, had less brain activity in the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that helps identify humanity, when shown photos of scantily clad women. This indicated that they were not seen as human, but rather as objects. This means that men who show other signs of sexism, that is a prejudice against women, are more likely to see women when they're less than human. And it's so much easier to commit violence against someone that you barely see as human. Objectification is possibly the only logical outcome to oversexualization. To oversexualize simply means to make a person's core being into a sexual one. To define them by their sexuality and their use for sex while denying them their own agency or being able to control their own sexual being. I deal with this fairly often. I run an art project called the Fat Naked Art Project. Fat naked bodies which are meant to be neither sexualized nor objectified, but this is often the case. Inappropriate comments have needed to be removed and moderated time and time again. My fat models, very specifically the women, are seen as nothing more than sexual objects, specifically fat objects. Their entire identity and being are often reduced to the type of belly they have or the size of their thighs. So then, I'll beg the question, why are fat women so over-sexualized? One reason may be that fat women often have larger breasts, which are downright fetishized in our culture. But another reason may be that fat women are othered, made to feel different, to exist in a separate societal box. This makes them into a forbidden fruit dangling just out of reach. Fat women have their own set of sexual stereotypes as well. They're always easy, they're desperate, they'll sleep with anyone who pays attention to them. These stereotypes that over-sexualize fat women also lead to many people seeing them as objects, which leads us back to rape culture. Several months ago, now a little over a year ago, I wrote a post on my blog about fat girls and rape culture, which was inspired by a Cafe Press t-shirt, which read, "Fat girls can't say no, and when they do, it means yes." Fat girls and women who are sexually assaulted are often told a myriad of horrible things to try and delegitimize their experiences. "You should be grateful," is the one I hear most often. Grateful. Because who would want to touch a fat chick? And here we come to the desexualization of fat women. Isn't it interesting that we can be both hypersexualized and desexualized at the same time? Our sexuality is often denied to us. In the movie The Lorax, the fat aunt of the main character is being mean and the Lorax himself threatens to hit her. Our main character steps in asking, "You wouldn't hit a woman, would you?" To which the Lorax replies, "That's a woman?" We all know that line, right? It's all for good laughs. Fat women are rarely allowed to be sexual beings in the media, and when they are, it's as a twist, a surprise, or a joke. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan. Even with all the problems, I still watch it. But I couldn't help but notice that Donna, which was one of the earlier companions, the one character who is, although not fat, a little thicker, the only companion who is never ever shown as a sexual being. In fact, her lack of sexuality is joked about. In the Doctor's Daughter episode, where she offers to use her womanly wiles to get past some guards. The butt of the joke. When Rebel Wilson becomes sexual in Bridesmaids, it's a garish display that involves, you guessed it, food. Her sexuality is meant to be laughed at in a way that she's not really sexual at all. Both oversexualization and desexualization share a common aspect in the removal of our agency. While men, straight women, and lesbians often take control and ownership of their sexualities, both oversexualization and desexualization involve having those decisions taken away. Women are oversexualized through the assumption and assertion that they want any sex with any person and do not need to consent to that. These women are given a default of yes. Women are desexualized when their agency over sex is taken away from them and given to someone else. Sex is not something that fat women are seen as having a choice in, but something the generous will gift upon them, and they can only respond by being grateful. It's interesting to note that fat people are often hypervisible while being completely invisible at the same time. By hypervisible, I mean that fat is on everyone's lips. We're in the news, all over the media, even on the radio and ads and billboards, but we're talked about as dehumanized objects. The classic headless fatty is a good example. We're invisible in the sense that we're rarely seen as human, and indeed our humanity often flies under the radar. In a very similar way, bisexual women are hypervisible in that women are almost expected to be bisexual, to experiment, to have a more fluid sexuality. But we're sexualized to a point of dehumanization. Actual bisexual issues, including biphobia and discrimination, are overlooked and made invisible. While bisexual women are oversexualized and not desexualized, it's a problem in and of itself that bisexual women are seen as being constant sexual beings and sexual objects. Living as a fat bisexual woman means being oversexualized and desexualized in various ways. Specifically, I believe that the combination of oversexualization and desexualization inherently lead to objectification because it dehumanizes its target. What does this dehumanization and objectification mean for everyday fat bisexual women though? What it means is constant stigmatization, discrimination, oppression, and violence. We're objects that aren't important enough to treat with respect or equality. It can often mean violence, from verbal to physical, from partners who have something to prove. It can mean being othered. It can mean rape culture is a daily reality for you. It can mean being bullied and abused, and it can mean constant state of anxiety and a culture that refuses to recognize your basic humanity. Being fat is its own challenge, but being fat and queer is its own experience. While being queer isn't usually outwardly visible and being fat is, they can carry different consequences that when combined can become overwhelming. As a bisexual, you can become automatically closeted because people assume your sexuality based on your current relationship. As a woman, your sexuality can be automatically invalidated. And as a fat bisexual woman, you can be fetishized and dehumanized. I believe the solutions to these issues is the destigmatization of both fat bodies and queer identities. Though the oppression of both these groups is deeply ingrained in our society, it's not a lost cause. As queer rights and fat rights pick up steam via social media, literature, protests, and demonstrations, we also pick up more supporters. While I fear that internalized fat phobia and biphobia may be a large hurdle, I have seen this overcome in so many people through my activism and the activism of others that it gives me great hope. I'm so inspired by many other activists, and I see the progress we've made even since I found fat acceptance in 2010. While it almost seems like the war on obesity efforts have doubled, fat acceptance is spreading quickly. Perhaps the key to destigmatization is not only getting others to accept us, but getting people to accept themselves. In a society where we often deal with the internalized bigotry, self-acceptance is a core part of our activism and goals. When you convince one person to change their bigotry and lack of acceptance for others, you make a small but meaningful impact towards the change we need to see.